Doug, over to you.
All right, cool. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Hi, everybody. This is Doug Davis, running today's May 4th edition of the Kubernetes community call. The call is being recorded. So obviously, if you don't like that, you're free to leave. We have a fairly full agenda today. Jason, are you on the call to take notes for us? I don't see.
Or do we have other volunteers? Jason has been super awesome.
Yeah, I like leaning on Jason.
I can take notes
Who's
after.
that? Okay, I'll try to take notes during your talk then, Brendan. Thank you. That was Brendan, right?
Yeah, Brandon.
Okay, Brandon, sorry. I always mispronounce it. Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right. All right, so first up on the agenda, we actually have Brendan talking about, or giving a demo. Is that your screen that we're seeing there?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay. All right, go for it.
All right, great. So there we go. So what I want to walk through was some work that we've been doing with this piece of software called SIG Operator, and how we have used it to make it easier to run HA clusters for Kubernetes. So this is pretty straightforward. We all in the Kubernetes community understand this, like scaling stateless applications is easy. You just say, I want more copies of my pod running, and then Kubernetes kind of just makes it happen. But scaling more complex applications, like a database, is a lot harder. It's easy to create like a single database. So like take a stateful set and run like MySQL in the stateful set. But it's slightly more harder to run a distributed database where you have all these concerns around resize of the cluster and upgrade, reconfiguration, backup, and healing. And these are all like, you can run kind of static distributed databases inside of stateful sets, and it's pretty easy. But you start to need essentially some lifecycle management or some software smarts in order to make the experience really, really good for the person who's responsible for running the service. And so pretty novel idea, but we extend Kubernetes by using third-party resources and start to describe like the cluster database that we want to have. So let's say we have a database that maybe has read replicas, and we want to say that there's a size of 3 members in the database, and then 2 of them are read replicas, and we set a version number. So we introduced this concept a while back called operators, but essentially an operator is just a piece of software that encodes like the operational knowledge of a distributed system to reliably manage it. And so most people are familiar with etcd, but etcd is the primary data store of Kubernetes. So if you think through analogy, like WordPress has MySQL, Kubernetes has etcd. And so as the primary data store, we have to make sure that there's a system in place that is able to take really good care of Kubernetes. And our whole idea is that there's no better system for taking care of distributed systems than Kubernetes. So let's use Kubernetes to manage the etcd cluster that is relied upon by Kubernetes. And so we created a resource called an etcd cluster resource, and you're able to specify, hey, I want an etcd cluster of this size with this version, et cetera, with these backup policies, et cetera, et cetera. And so this piece of software called the SIG Operator goes through and ensures that whatever you specified actually happens. So like if you've specified you want 3.1 of etcd and it detects one of the members is on 3.0.9, it will actually go through and upgrade the cluster safely. So you can find that on GitHub if you're interested, and it makes it really easy to run etcd clusters on top of Kubernetes. Now, when I originally gave this talk at KubeCon a long time ago, one of our hopes was to make it easy to run good, high-quality etcd clusters for Kubernetes API server itself using Kubernetes. And I'm happy to say that that work has gone around very nicely, and that we now have it all working. So I wanted to show you the update. So This is a cluster that's running on top of AWS, and we have the etcd operator installed, and it has a 3-member cluster. And I'm able to introspect all the pods and everything, which is a big advantage of running on top of Kubernetes, is that we can use all the Kubernetes APIs for monitoring, et cetera. Now I'm going to just kill one of the AWS instances that etcd is running on. The nice thing here is that because we have all the health checking and everything of Kubernetes to rely upon, we can go in, look at the node. The node, once we go to the node list, will actually end up getting into a not ready state because it's being shut down and destroyed. And then when we come and introspect the etcd cluster, it will detect the nodes disappear that the etcd member was running on and actually remove it from the cluster. And so now we're in a degraded state, and the etcd operator has scheduled a new pod, but it's not schedulable because we don't have a new node that's labeled as a master node available. Once the AWS autoscaling group schedules a new node, which is in the not ready state, flips over to ready, the etcd operator is then, well, actually Kubernetes is then able to schedule the pod. The pod goes through into the init container, joins the etcd cluster, and then the etcd cluster is healthy once again. So the big advantage here is that we're able to essentially twofold. We're able to use Kubernetes APIs to manage etcd. We're able to use all the introspection and monitoring that we have for all the normal user services in order to ensure the health of the service over time, and then all the lifecycle management of nodes in the system as well. So that's the demo. I had to record it because it's painfully boring to watch AWS spin down a machine and spin a new one up. We would be here for 10 minutes just walking spinners. So I edited it, but I recorded it this morning on a live cluster. So one of the natural questions is, holy wow, is this safe to do? And it is safe. We have, just like if you were to run etcd statically on your cluster, the bedrock of the whole system is files on disk. So if you trust your file system and the fact that files on disk end up with the kubelet rescheduling static pods, then we can trust the system. If we can't trust the kubelet, we're kind of in trouble anyways. So I think that it's a safe bet that Linux file systems and the kubelet continue to do their work correctly. So what we do is we essentially snapshot the required components, which is essentially the etcd instance and the API server to disk. And then when the kubelet relaunches, these static manifests get relaunched as well. So the way that this whole cluster was set up, it's using a piece of software that I built called the Tectonic Installer, which just installs unpatched, just upstream Kubernetes across whatever platform you want. And it's Terraform based, and you can find it at Tectonic Installer. It uses components from SIG cluster lifecycle to actually deploy the cluster. So we've integrated etcd operator as an option inside of Bootkube, and then Terraform installs the AWS infrastructure, and then Bootkube installs the cluster. There's been discussions about, that's supposed to be kubeadmin, this week and the week previous about kubeadmin potentially using etcd operator in the future. And there's some mailing list posts about both etcd operator and Bootkube and Tectonic Installer on the SIG cluster lifecycle mailing list if you're interested. That's all I got. I probably have about one question worth of time.
Yeah, I think we do have time. Thank you. It looks really cool. Any questions for Brandon? Not at all?
Cool.
All right, cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And Jason, thank you for stepping in and taking notes. I appreciate that. All right, moving on to the agenda then. Releases. Do we have Dawn on to talk about 1.7?
Yes. So here, here's the status for 1.7 release management team updates, and so we finally found our CI signal lead, and thanks to Eric Chang from the CoreOS volunteer to take that role. And now we have the entire team build. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone, and hopefully we can improve our release process and experience. So yesterday we have the first SIG release team kickoff meeting, and we reviewed the 1.6 release, the 1.6 release retrospective document, and discuss what kind of from the community, the wish list, and we are locked down the several working items. And from my perspective, personally, as the lead, I want to help to solve the two problems. One, it is I want to have the single wheel to help the release team and to try to determine the release, no matter it's alpha release or beta release or release candidate, whatever. So have the easy way to figure out all the signal, aggregate all the signal from the flaky test and from each SIG groups, and also from the community and open issues, bugs, all those kind of things. So we talked to Alago team. There's the internal Google team, and try to help us to generate some more signal based on our current building tools. So those it is under discussing. Another goal I try to hit it is I want to leverage of the SIG groups contribution. So we have I look at the current of the feature repo for MacWiz for the 1.7 release. We already have the 55 open issues. So another one, I look at the main repo. Right now, we already have the 262 open issues marked for the 1.7 milestone. And I believe those numbers will increase. And then, so one of the issues I heard from the most of the community, it is nobody knows what we deliver. We do have the feature repo, but we have the tons, sorry. Some question?
If you're not talking, please go on mute. Go ahead, Dawn.
So thanks. And so the problem is each SIG group, even you ask the SIG lead, and there's the certain feature added contributed by that SIG group, and they don't know actually that they will be surprised sometimes, and there's the PR in without the issue associated, or even there's the issue associated, and the SIG lead, or maybe the team from that SIG group and the member from that SIG group, they have no idea why those kind of included and cause the issues. So I'm working on some proposal. We are, and also discuss with the release team, and we try to kind of at least figure out a way to in the future for the long term, and we can determine at least each SIG group and some representative, either lead or delegate, someone will say, okay, we know what's going on with our SIG group and what is included in each release. So this is kind of try to help solve that problem. So those two problems, what I identify, need resolved. And then there's the several other problems for the tools, all those kind of things. And SIG release team still, we are working on the proposal and try to do those kind of things. I'm going to send some proposal to the community shortly about those kind of things, and for the discussing. Another thing it is, so back to the 1.6 release. So I also try to tag with each release, like the alpha release, and make sure apply semi-critical requirement for the final release. So for each alpha release, we still go through all those test grade and figure out, determine it is which one is blocker and which one is non-blocker for alpha release. Of course, those requirements not as restricted as the final release candidate. So yesterday I identified one issue, which is to make the serious GCE serious test suite failed more than 75%. So thanks for the SIG scheduling team, and they are taking really quick action and they fix. So we are going to cut Alpha 3 today. And so we are also talking about we're also talking about how to simplify our document, like at the first stage, and for the so Andrew and Chen have some proposal. He will send it to the community certainly about those kind of things. So that's all from the 1.7.
Cool, great list. Any questions for Don? All right, thank you very much, Don. Moving on, Anthony, are you on the call for update on 1.6?
Anthony is not able to join us today. There is a 1.6 release that will be cherry-picked and happen next week, though, when he returns to the office.
Excellent, cool, thank you. All right, what about 1.5? I'm going to butcher the name, Marcin or Markin?
Marcin, and he also has no update this week. Generally, the patches go out together when there are issues to be cherry picked in. So I would expect the 1.5.x to also get released next week. No guarantees on that one because I didn't ask Marcin, but.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Let's move on to SIG updates. SIG AWS first. Chris, are you on the call? Chris Nova? Chris? Maybe? All right, we'll circle back around, maybe you'll join later. All right, let's move on to, excuse me, SIG Service Catalog, and that's me. So we're coming up on our Alpha 6 release, so V006. Hopefully that'll be ready for next Wednesday. We're on a weekly release cadence right now. For the most part, our big ticket items for Service Catalog are pretty much in place. And as a result of that, we're looking at actually going to our first alpha release, I'm sorry, beta release right around May 17th. So V0.1 should be put out there. So in preparation for that, we're looking at finalizing and a review of our resource model, because obviously once you go to beta, things are kind of locked in there. And just for you guys' understanding in terms of what we do support, we do support registering of service brokers, managing of the service classes, instances and bindings, creating the secrets that you can then bind to your applications. We had a very large dependency on Jesse's work for pod presets, which, thank you very much, went into 1.6. So we're going to start leveraging that very soon. And we do support storing all those resources in SCD as well as TPRs for those who want to do one or the other. And we're also working on extending the CLI using the new CLI extension mechanism that I believe the PR just went in fairly recently for that. So we're looking at extending the CLIs with some additional porcelain for a better UX experience. And also we're working very closely with the Open Service Broker API working group over in the Cloud Foundation land to make sure that that any changes or any issues that we're running into are reflected back in the spec in terms of spec updates. And as they work on spec updates in terms of new features, we're working on prototyping those features in Kubernetes itself to be, to show them off as proof of concept kind of things, because you need to actually have them implemented before they get adopted into a spec. So we have some tight integration work going on there with the spec work. And I think that's about it in terms of what's going on in SIG Service Catalog. Any questions? All right, moving on then.
Doug, I couldn't type fast enough, so if you could, you could add that awesome list of things to the notes.
Yeah, I have it written down. I apologize. I was talking kind of fast, but yes, I'll paste it in there.
So one quick question, if you can hear me, we're trying out a new setup here. So with the secrets that are created when you do service bindings, are those just being saved as Kubernetes secrets?
Yes, they're generic Kubernetes secrets, nothing special.
Okay. So they'll benefit from all the work that's ongoing in SIG Auth to improve the way we store and manage those. Very cool.
Okay. Yeah, and using the pod presets, you can pull them into your application however you want, right? As volumes, environment variables, whatever. Cool. All right, moving on then to SIG Federation. Christian, are you on the call?
I am on the call. I'll start with testing. It was a significant progress since Q1 in Federation for testing. We have CI, which has been green for many weeks now, thanks to a few focused efforts of people in the SIG. Now, what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks is we'll be moving to a build comp rotation between various contributors throughout the SIG, because it's only been two or three people who've been managing the CI for now. The pre-submit tests have been running on every PR. These are not made visible yet through GitHub, but after a bit of test info work that has to be done, once that's checked in and enabled, every PR that's updated through GitHub will go through the Federation pre-submit tests, like the other ones that have existed for a while now. Also, integration testing has been significantly improved. We have the ability to move a lot of the CRUD type testing that's in E2E into integration tests. The reason that's a big difference for Federation is because there's many clusters that have to be brought up and down. E2E testing is inherently more fragile, so the more we can move to integration, the better it is for being able to test more and have less infrastructure-related failures. We've had a big refactor led by Maru at Red Hat, and that's helped because we've accumulated a lot of tech debt over time by adding more and more controllers to Federation. He's written a factory type controller, and we've been able to move a lot of the existing simpler CRUD type controllers and re-implement them over his abstraction. So this would be secrets, config maps, and daemon sets. And the benefit there is there's also an integration testing component with this sync controller, so we get kind of free integration testing. And we expect that we're going to roll all the other controllers that are more complex onto this abstraction. Then with regards to the SIG, there's some change in scheduling. We used to be bi-weekly, and we're going to move to weekly. And the main reason there is we kind of go back and forth between administrivia updates, and we were getting behind in design reviews. So now we're going to do every even week will be a design review. We're announcing the topics in advance, expecting people to read up on them. And then every other week we'll keep doing the update format. And of note, I guess there's some cross collaboration in SIG led by Nikhil to try to nail down an authentication story within Federation.
All right, anything else?
Nope, that'll be it.
All right, cool. Any questions for Christian?
Did you mention when expected pre-submits should be blocking?
It should have been last week, this week. A bit of it is just dependency and pushback from test infra. They're all valid concerns. My hope is sometime this week or next week. We do have if it keeps being delayed, we do have somewhat of a backup plan to disable some of the more Digity tests. So I'd expect something sometime next week.
Okay.
I think it might be worth, can I add my 2 cents there? Might be worth just briefly mentioning that we've got quite a lot of pretty interesting Federation-related features scheduled for 1.7 as well. Amongst them, federated stateful sets, federated jobs, federated horizontal pod auto-scaling. Off the top of my head, I think, yeah, those are the most interesting, and there are about 6 or 8 others I seem to recall.
Cool. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much, Christian. Moving on, improve test maintenance and review deleted jobs. Michael, are you on the call?
Yeah, right here. I don't know if Eric's here yet or not, but that's fine.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, cool. So just to give everyone a little background on how I got suddenly interested in improving some of the process around our tests, I found a nice, polite email from Eric Fetched in my inbox a couple weeks ago that said, "Hey, I'm deleting a bunch of tests." And I was kind of like, is this a good idea? Like, should we just delete a bunch of tests because they're failing? And so we had a chance to kind of sit down and talk about that. And this is what came out of that. Short answer to that, yes, for some jobs it does make sense because they've always failed and they're basically worthless. But there's a bigger issue here, which is that there are a lot of testing signals that it just seems that people just don't pay attention to. And because nobody cares about them, they're probably useless. And we shouldn't run tests that nobody cares about. Unfortunately, we don't have a very good handle on what people care about. So that's kind of what led to this. Let's just send out a warning and delete jobs that look like nobody cares about them, which does clean up some of the signaling, but also runs the risk that we lose coverage because people haven't been paying attention either to their tests or to those warning emails. So one thing we'd like to do is make sure people have a lot of opportunity to review those deleted jobs and bring back jobs they care about. And then another thing we want to do is improve our systems for managing our test and job creep, so that we don't continually get into this situation. And we think there are a few simple things we can do to improve those processes. So in broad strokes, there's 3 things we think we can do. One is that we want to start requiring explicit ownership of both tests and test jobs. Just a couple short definitions. For the purpose of this chat, let's just say a test, like for an EDE test, is one of these named things that you can select over. So like when you write an EDE test in Jinko, you have this describe function that has a name on it. And a job is one of these configurations that spins up a cluster with a certain set of parameters and runs a certain set of those tests. And so we want to require explicit ownership of both of those categories of things. So we would like to, for example, have SIG names in test names to identify that ownership. And there's also a JSON file in test infra that has every job listed, and we'd like to add like an owner's field to like each one of those job definitions so that we can have SIGs own those as well. This next step that we'd like to do is make all of the test results that each group cares about highly visible to that group, because our hypothesis is that people aren't paying attention to tests that might be relevant to them because it's a pain in the butt to actually go into the test grid and dig through all the tabs and like find the very specific pieces you care about. So what we'd like to do is, based on this ownership information, just generate dashboards for each SIG that contain the things that they care about. In addition to that, this is less well defined, but we should define some kind of SLA on test maintenance with some sort of consequence for not maintaining your test. That's kind of where we're at.
So I think
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you have anything you want to add to this?
I think that, you know, this sounds, yeah, I think this will be a great start. I think that, you know, getting to where jobs, where I think right now, yeah, it's, you know, part of the problem is it's unclear, like, whose test is this? And I think that this might, if we can clarify that, I think that'll be really helpful. And yeah. And so, yeah, you know, Aaron after this has some additional things to say as well, which I think are, you know, relevant.
Yeah, sure. I guess I can segue into that. First, just a quick comment on, I think we all want better ownership of tests, and we want to do that at the SIG level, probably rather than the individual level, to assist with the cases where people are out on vacation or whatever. I really kind of hate some of the horrible regular expressions we have to use to articulate which subset of tests we'd like to run, and pine for some way of richer metadata around the tests. So at some point, we could definitely go down the path of having yet another, you know, in brackets SIG foo thing in each describe function, but I would caution that we're bending that mechanism to the point of breaking at some point here. A possible alternative might be looking to restructure the E2E directory into something that's a little more, that could be more effectively utilized by the existing owners mechanism that we have, that some of our bots use to auto-assign people and allow people to approve or LGTM things. My 2 cents on that. Okay, so I'm going to talk, but I want to just sort of make clear that I didn't really do much of this work. Eric Feda has done a bunch of this, and so have a number of folks within the Contributor Experience Working Group. This is all around the context of test flakiness, where we're at with it today, where we've been with it, and where we would like to go. So if you give me a moment here, I'm going to try and share my screen. But if you want to just follow along yourself, most of these should be in the meeting notes. So at a high level,
Aaron,
yes.
Aaron, can you make the text a little bit bigger?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there are words there.
Yeah.
Thank
at
you.
a high level, we would rather encourage the idea of good test hygiene rather than having to continually bring down the hammer. Those who've been around this community long enough know that pretty much every release cycle, we enter something akin to a fix-it, or we throw up our hands in disgust at how bad the submit queue has become or how flaky everything is. And Eric made this fantastic analogy where it's like, we don't really brush our teeth every day, and so we're shocked when we have to go to the dentist and suddenly get a bunch of root canals. It's painful, and it's not really a sustainable solution. If we actually,
brilliant metaphor.
if we actually took the time to brush our teeth every day, we might not have to go through this so often. So I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but Brendan, a little while ago, put together the concept of a flakiness SLA, which, hang on here, let me see which one of my tabs it's in. Okay, so we now have this document in the community repo that sort of describes the definition of what a flake is, and the concept that we would like to accomplish an SLA of not flaking way too much. We're defining how we're going to measure this. We are in the process of creating infrastructure to measure this and to start displaying it. And initially, this was made with the idea that we should just shut down the submit queue entirely so that nobody should be able to submit any PRs or have them merged in unless we as a community have gotten the flake rate down to an acceptable level. This caused a little bit of wailing and gnashing of teeth, both in the PR, where we discussed this issue, as well as the Google Dev thread that initially proposed all of this. If you're interested at all in the historical context of what has led us to today, I encourage you to go look at those things. But effectively, I think where we're at is we want to get to the point where we're measuring and displaying this metric, but we want to start in the small with a more human-oriented enforcement mechanism to see if we can get people to properly pay attention here. So to that end, you may have noticed that Eric's been sending out flake reports and top test failure reports. So I'm just going to take a look at one of them right here. This is artisanally handcrafted and slow roasted. I really greatly appreciate the effort he's put into this, wherein he's highlighting SIGs that are actually being responsible, SIGs that are ignoring the top failures that are, flaking the most and could potentially hold up the queue the most. He does a fantastic job of calling out where we are this week and how we've improved since last week. You'll notice that we're only calling out sort of the top 3 things here. We're trying to start really small and see if we can focus our attention on the top 3 on a weekly basis. And if we actually have an impact, that we will actually make progress.
Aaron, do you mind if I add a piece of color to this that Eric told me that just kind of blew me away about how important this was?
Please.
So some of these top hits, I've been calling this list internally just to myself the greatest hits of right now sort of test flakes or test issues in Kubernetes. And what was interesting to me was when Eric showed me that sometimes 4 or 5 issues will be causing tens of thousands of test errors or multiple thousands of test errors, while the majority of test errors that we see are in the tens. And so we can really stabilize and increase the confidence that we've got in our system by addressing these greatest hits.
Yes, I agree completely. So maybe sort of to that point, there's this metric that is in the flake report that Eric sends out. This is separate from the test failures report, but we talk about PR consistency, which I believe basically means the probability that given that you submit a PR or ask for a complete retest of your PR, how likely is it that all of the tests will pass? We're up to 90%, which is great, but if you invert that, that kind of means that 1 out of 10 PRs is going to fail, which when we have as many PRs as we do, isn't the best experience. Now, it could be that what Eric showed you is the Triage Tool, which was put together by Ryan Hitchman. You can get to it by going to co.cates.io/triage. And this basically attempts to aggregate here, I'll just reload this to make sure I've got the top data. It aggregates sort of all the different failures that have happened and tries to cluster them together so you can see which particular jobs or tests that this given failure has caused, little spark lines around how frequently they happen. Each of these clusters is linkable. I'm trying to find the one that maybe Eric pointed you to. There was a GitHub issue. Never mind. Right, so here Eric opened up an issue and he was actually able to link to that triage page to demonstrate all of the different tests that that cluster. Sorry, I guess the triage tool must have been rebooted. The data may not be super persistent. But if you remember, like we sort of previewed that this would be coming during the 1.6 release cycle. It's basically super usable today. You want to find the error that's happening and affecting the most tests. You can use this tool to figure it out and start triaging it. And we're hopeful that this can also help better inform what's the most important flake to be addressing right now. Finally, all the numbers and stuff are really useful. We all really like graphs. We're not quite at the point where we have graphs or dashboards of all this stuff, but we are starting to get to the point where we're taking all of the test results that are stored into Google Cloud Storage, extracting those using something called Kettle, Kubernetes extract test results, transform and load. And then we're using BigQuery, triggered by Prow, to generate metrics on a repeatable basis about those test results. So for example, if I take a look at the weekly consistency job, you can see here the wonderfully concise BigQuery that's used to generate this metric. And then you can see the latest results for that. I'll put the text up here a little bit. And so I believe, Eric can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is where we get that percentage consistency that he emails out in the flake reports, where we see on a week-by-week basis, how is our consistency improving, and how many commits happen to have gone in that week. So, you know, I guess this is maybe a preview of, we're starting to amass data. We want to make sure the data is actionable. Through the contributor experience working group, I know there's a lot of interest in trying to find metrics that highlight the health of this project. That's probably the best forum to go discuss this for future work, or are encouraged by this and would like to see more. I unfortunately didn't attend the meeting yesterday, but maybe this came up there. But so the point is, we're trying to shine a light on where we're at with flakes. We're trying to take the human approach so that we hopefully don't have to bring down the hammer. I think that's pretty much all I've got. Any questions?
I have a question, if it's okay.
Sure.
So it sounds like the way I've been thinking about this right now is that, like, the work that you just discussed and disavowed any credit for, and we keep quoting all the work that Eric and probably even more people than Eric have been doing. It feels like it's beginning to really percolate out and escape just a small group of people, as we're now asking and calling for more people to get involved. And providing this context in the community meeting is brilliant and really cool. One of the things I think might be I'm kind of asking, is it the right next step to sort of have SIG leads provide this context in the SIG, either through email or a SIG meeting, to say, hey, look, this is going on, and to make sure that people pay attention to, again, I'm going to stick with my simple construct of the greatest hits, so that we jump on these things quickly. Like, how do we spread this message even more than just this meeting?
Well, we could I'm maybe going to defer to Eric on where he feels we're at readiness-wise. I know that one of our hopes is to, in combination with getting SIGs attributed to tests and jobs more directly, and this test consistency data, you can see how we eventually get to a dashboard that's automatically generated that we can start using on a SIG by SIG basis. What are the top failures that each SIG sort of has to deal with? And that, we believe, is a tool that the release team could use to drive down bugs and flakes as we look towards the next release. Is that sort of the question you're asking?
That's what we're going to get eventually, but I mean, I'm thinking for today, right? Like, I want to make sure that we, what I hate is when people come to me, like when I'm developing and someone says, this bug, stop what you're doing and work on it. But then when I find out, oh, look, this is one of the larger bugs that's holding up a lot of other things, and here's the context, and here's why it's important. And so it feels to me almost a bit of a full court press and communication for this effort, because it's important and it feels holistic. And I don't know if that's too much or not. I'm curious.
I guess I can't speak to how actively these emails are being received and acted upon. I think that's likely why there's a section included where we highlight things that have stalled or seem to have no action. And I would encourage and be thrilled if SIG leads of the SIGs that are actually mentioned in these emails made it a point to raise these particular issues in their SIGs. We could also, through our handcrafting, include those particular SIG Google groups, but that might just get as easily lost in the noise as a Kubernetes dev email would. I feel like it's a human problem, and so for as many SIG leads that are on here, I'm asking you as a human to please pay attention to this little tiny human effort while we work to automate it. We want to see if it's useful in the small before we start ramping up the frequency of it, right?
Cool. Thank you. That answers the question for me.
I have a bit of a comment. Like, we definitely need to get SIGs accountable for failures that they're causing. But something I found when I was filling the test lead role for 1.6 was that we had like a bunch of flakes. We didn't have any status. Like, we don't have an issue tracker. We have GitHub. And so we've talked about maybe enabling status via labels, just so that if you have a list of flakes, you know what the next step is to deal with it, whether it be triaging, whether it be fixing it, whether it be giving it code review, or whether it's done. And that's not really something you can do in an automated fashion. You need people to go and look at a list and figure out where it's at and try to move it forward.
Yeah, I had a related suggestion, which is that one of the problems we struggle with in this area is just the sheer volume of these things. And one of the causes of that, which was mentioned earlier, is that we have these kind of cascading failure scenarios where, for some reason, some bug goes in that, we can't bring up nodes, for example, or can't bring up pods. And then clearly, any test that relies on being able to successfully launch pods is going to fail. And you end up with these cascading failures. And it seems that, defining some basic dependency graph might address a lot of these problems. So for example, you run the pod tests first, and if they don't fail, you don't bother running anything else because clearly they're going to fail. And all the noise for the downstream tests failing is just noise, and it's parsing and labeling, and then we end up with hundreds and hundreds of auto-generated issues. That seems like it could be a relatively small effort with a very large payoff. And there are other examples. If you can't get services to run, then clearly everything else that relies on a service is not going to work. And you don't need to generate test failures and triage bugs, etc. to.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
So I definitely think that getting all of this information out to people is a work in progress, and definitely if there is any feedback or suggestions that you have about how we can make sure that this information is seen by all the relevant people, I think that'd be great to reply to me or reply to the email or whatever, leave a message in WG Contribex or SIG testing on Slack. But yeah, definitely still iterating on what the right level of visibility is. And something else that I've been trying is I do actually send if like SIG whatever is included in the email, I'll actually send the email to SIG whatever. And then I'll also go into the SIG whatever Slack channel and post, sort of a even more concise summary of what's happening and how that SIG is relevant, and include a link to there. And definitely over time, we're hoping to automate some of this because, it is sort of handcrafted and laborious at the moment. But I think that, if we can use this to have SIGs start, or the leaders in SIGs start acting on this information, or even if it's just acting on the information by saying, hey, this information is useless to me. But even better if it's like, oh, cool, hey, this is super useful now, so let's go fix this. That would be great. And the only other thing, consistency. I'm distinguishing consistency from stability. I'm calling it stability like the pass rate, whereas consistency is it giving the same answer every time? So since PRs, it's kind of hard since I might actually push a bad change. A test failure might not actually be a problem if it's because my PR is bad. So as long as every time I push the change, if it gives me the same answer, because if it fails, I can ask a retest. And if it's a flake, it might now pass. And so then for the same commit, we'll have both a pass and a fail. So that's inconsistent, aka a flake. Whereas if it always fails or always passes, that's a inconsistent result. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Any last minute questions, comments?
Just
all right, well, thank you guys.
Thanks, Eric. This is phenomenal work. You've really been digging in and making far more of a difference, I think, than sitting here trying to solve all the problems for all the people. I think focusing in the small and taking the human approach, while maybe not the Google way of doing things, I'm a huge, just hugely, that's great. It's really, really great. Thanks.
Agreed. Thank you, Aaron. All right, moving on then. Code of conduct, Sarah.
Hi. So unless you've been under a deluge of GitHub notifications, you may actually have seen 2 posts to Kubernetes dev this week about some concerns about someone joining our community. I would like us all to continue as a community to take the high road in this. There have also been press people asking questions, sniffing about this. Even if you have information, even if you don't have information, people are being asked by press. And I think it's incredibly important that we stand by the public comments as the, we have an issue, we have resolved an issue, and not name names or companies in this in any way, because this is ultimately about the happiness and health of our community and not about specific individuals within it. So we have, in all of this process, found some flaws in our code of conduct and code of conduct policy, as in the policy right now is if we have a code of conduct violation, it should be escalated privately to me or Dan Cohn of the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. And in this case, the concerns were not escalated to me or Dan, they were escalated publicly. So again, for happiness and health of our community and to keep it as low drama as possible, I want to remind everyone, if anyone comes to you talking about something that is a code of conduct concern, for the immediate term, please have them reach out to me or Dan. And going forward, we need to establish a code of conduct committee and define what we want to do for enforcement. In this case, our enforcement was to request that this person not be assigned to our project. And we have gone ahead and worked through that negotiation and made that possible at this point. So please point back to any of the public statements. Don't offer further comment. Please don't speculate. And even if you have any further information on it, don't offer comment. That would be that would make my day, actually, possibly even my week at this point.
Okay, so I'm afraid to ask this, but I'll ask it anyway. Any questions for Sarah?
No, I was
clarifying questions.
Clarifying questions, oblique questions, forward-looking questions. What can I help with?
Anything.
Anyone?
All right, cool.
Comment.
Comment.
I have to say I am super impressed with the speed and efficacy of the response to this, and that kind of sincerity about our code of conduct is what is going to make this community feel good to people who are traditionally feeling a little bit marginalized in other communities. So I just sincerely want to thank everybody who was involved in that rapid response, and thank you so much. It means a huge amount to people, especially those that feel like they don't have a full voice.
Thank you, Jason. In fairness, since we had no code of conduct committee and myself and Dan alone could not make this decision, the governance bootstrap committee has helped us work through this decision this decision, I say decision, this path that we took, because there was no decision made by the Kubernetes community. There was a request made to have this person not participate. So we made no decision saying that this person could not. We made a request that they did not.
Any other clarifying questions, comments? All right, cool. Thank you very much, Sarah. Last section on the agenda is notices, and since there's no name there, I'll take them myself. So there was some cleanup done of the feature backlog. We have about 50 features for version 1.7. If you are a feature owner and there was a request for an update made, please go check your feature and make the appropriate updates. Let's see, this week, or I'm sorry, next week in Boston, there's the OpenStack Summit. We do have a Kubernetes Day. If you're up there, please look at or think about joining. A link to the email that was sent out is in the agenda, so you can follow that link to get more information. And a brand new SIG release working group has been created, and they're looking to figure out what days are best to meet. So there's a survey that they started. Again, the link to that is in the agenda. If you'd like to join that, please follow that link. Any comments or questions about the notices?
I was curious if anybody happens to know offhand how many features we had in the 1.6 release of Kubernetes.
Eeyore's on a plane, but I bet he would know.
What was the question?
How many?
I think in 1.7?
1.6.
For comparison.
I think it was actually, we talked about this in the release meeting. I don't think the number was that high. I think it was around the 50s, I believe someone said yesterday, because it was seen as a stability release.
But it's a lot of, they don't have the feature issue associated.
If you look at the feature repository, the number was around the 50s.
Yes.
There was a question of, there's always a question of what is a bug and what is a feature. And I have to admit, I sit on both sides of the fence. When I'm a release manager, I play the hard line nose of, it looks like a bug to me, get it out. And then when I'm a developer, I say,
I think
this bug feels like a feature. This bug is, it's a bug, it's not a feature, let's get it in. So there was a bunch in the gray area too, and even in the room, the question of how much was in the gray area or not was in question. So, but the things that were clearly delineated and went through the process as a feature, I believe the number was like in the 50s or maybe 60s.
I think the bigger issue remains about.
So guys, Joe, hold on. Like Joe is waving.
I'm trying to wait my turn. I'm not in the room with all you guys. I think there's other confounding factors here. Is that we're trying to get more formal about the feature process, and right, so it's not apples to apples. And what does it mean for a feature to be in a release? Because features tend to actually arc across multiple releases as they move, one feature issue, as they move from alpha to beta to GA, right? And so I think, if we want to start tracking these metrics, we should probably get a little bit crisper about that.
Joe, I have one specific ask. Cluster lifecycle has a long doc of things for 1.7. But almost no feature issues. I think they only have one.
I assigned okay, so first of all, I'm not an official lead for cluster lifecycle. I probably should be. That falls on Luke. But in that doc, we called out specific people to put features in. I can poke those people to say, hey, you should really get on the ball there.
Yeah, if you could poke Luke or poke those people directly, I'm the one just asking you to carry the message. Thanks.
We were deadline, okay. Deadline is the last Monday. So we already passed the deadline. But I'm going to, earlier in the 1.7 release, I said one of the things I want to try to propose, it is even without the feature issue file in the feature report, we should have some visibility to some through the main report you file the feature request. So we try to figure out, and we need each SIG group. For example, in these cases, at least we should have the issue file against in the main report and mark that's the feature and the rest sponsored by the SIG class lifecycle. And any issues without a SIG group, at least the one SIG group, I'm going to propose just remove those from the milestone. And also I want to in the future the weekly burn down meeting and each group of the SIG groups lead or representative and give the updates on those kind of things. And so in these cases, we can control what is get into on each release.
So where do we want to have the discussion about the process?
SIG release team.
SIG
yes.
release. Okay,
yes.
so
we are
SIG
working on
PM people
yes.
please sync up with SIG release people.
Yes.
Also, I think, Joe, for what you talked about earlier about things that are, is it a one feature as it goes from alpha to beta? A lot of SIGs that I've worked with basically make it a new feature to move. They say, let's say foo is a feature, and foo comes in as alpha, and it goes in the feature repo. And then when foo goes to beta, they then create, you know, a new feature entry to the act of moving it to beta, and then again for GA. Is that something that you recommend, or is that to you like deceptive for the counting of new features?
I think that process is, I don't know what the latest is on that process. I mean, when you created a new feature, it was like, here's the criteria that you need, and we had been going through and sort of keeping that one feature alive across the different phases. I think we need to just pick something and go with it.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, we should talk about it in the, I guess, SIG release then.
Yes.
I'll say the most recent like features repo issue template I saw asks you to put the targets for each version of your feature in the same issue.
This is the most recent templates.
Yeah, like a week ago.
Yes.
So, okay, so since we're coming up on top of the hour, and I would recommend take this discussion to the SIG release group. And we are at the end of the agenda, however. Are there any other topics that people would like to bring up?
Yes, I had a kind of a general question. I was wondering, and again, if we're running short of time, that's okay. But I was just wondering if there's any plans to support like some kind of inter-service dependency, meaning, in order for service B to start, I need to make sure that service A is actually up and running. I was wondering if there is any plan. I haven't really heard anything in terms of Kubernetes. I know the Mirantis guys are working on something for Helm to provide some kind of dependency mechanism, but I was just wondering if there's anything in the works for that.
There's nothing in the works as far as I know. There's a long discussion in issue 1768 and others. I don't expect any quick action on that one. But
okay.
I think eventually we'll want to add some sort of service level readiness notion. And that's a concept that App Controller, which is the Mirantis thing you mentioned, has. So we probably want to move into the API. But I'm not aware of anyone prioritizing hashing out the design issues because it is going to be pretty significant API and controller changes.
No, I understand. I'm just, asking because it seems like it's, my experience, we keep seeing, that as a recurring issue, when launching, a whole bunch of service that makes up an application. And I think, especially given the microservices landscape of these days, it would be kind of nice to have some kind of automation, be able to kubectl on a directory, with a bunch of service definitions, and you could just, order the launch,
In general, I would prefer that orchestration not to happen at instantiation time, but for the controllers to understand the dependencies. It's just one simple example. If a pod, if a container needs to be started in a pod and it has a dependency on a config map and the config map doesn't exist,
right?
It'd be pretty easy to wait for the config map to get created.
Yes.
Or actually starting the container. So I would prefer in general for dependencies to be expressed like that. And one thing that I do know was going in, I don't know what the status is, whether it's gone in yet or not, is making the downward API for service links explicit, and that information can be used to do this kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, because I thought, with, readiness probes and annotations, that you could specify at the service level. By the way, I'm depending on service.
Okay, guys.
So which SIG is appropriate for this?
Joe, let's take this offline because
that's what I'm saying. Like, which SIG should they discuss this with?
Just mail Kubernetes dev.
Okay. Pick a SIG.
Okay, there you go. Okay, thank you guys very much. We're out of time.
Sorry about
that. Thank you guys for taking notes, or Jason for taking notes. I appreciate it. Talk to everybody next week.
Please take a peek at the notices section.
Happy Thursday.
May the 4th be with you.
the day of Thor, and Aaron looks a little Thor.
Yeah, seriously, George, these weren't the jokes you were looking for.